I knew the first time that I got a Bliss Hill email that I would someday address this group. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew it. So I wasn't surprised when I got the invitation. Happy, thrilled, honored, but not surprised. So 15 years ago, almost to the day today, I went in to have very, very, very routine gallbladder removal. How many women have had their gallbladders out? There's actually probably fewer than I would have thought. Okay, so this is where we get real. Physicians say fat 40 female, it's a gallbladder. So if you're a little chubby and you're female and you're over 40 and you present with pain, they almost always think gallbladder, and they're almost always right. And so in my case, that was it. So it's supposed to be really routine. Same day surgery now, even 15 years ago. So I go in. Well, I'd had a cesarean section, and I had a couple of other, surgeries along the way. And so I had some what they call surgical adhesions inside. So the surgeon, being a really nice guy, decided to clear those adhesions, kind of break them up and clear them out. So when I woke up from anesthesia, I was in a little more pain than normal. And he said, you're going to feel a little wretched for a day or so. We're going to keep you overnight. We're going to give you some great medication. You're going to feel so much better, and you'll go home at noon tomorrow. No problem. Well, it didn't go as planned. And the long and the short of it is I spent more than 6 weeks in the hospital. I had a terrible reaction to at least one, if not 2 or 3 different medications. I was on a ventilator in the ICU and not well. Multi-system organ failure, anything that can go wrong did. And I was pretty sick chicken. And one night, I don't know, late at night, middle of the night, I removed my IV, and somehow I managed to get out of these fancy ICU beds and shinny either over or under the bed rails. And I was starting to walk out the door. And I thought that's what I was supposed to do, because there was a nurse in the room with me who was beautiful and calm and caring, and invited me up and out of bed. And I got as far out of my room as the nurse's station, and by then the alarms on my bed are going, bah, 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 rah, 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 rah. If you've been in an ICU, you know what those alarms sound like. And the nurse comes around the corner and she said, "Excuse me, are you headed somewhere?" And I said, "Yes, I'm leaving." And she said, no, we don't do celestial discharges on my watch. I was being guided to leave by, I'm not sure whom. Looking back, I think it might have been my guardian angel. It was somebody really lovely and wonderful who made me feel so calm and so ready. But the nurse intervened. And to this day, I felt as though the presence of the divine was right there in the room with me, and I wasn't afraid, and I really wasn't happy to have to go back to bed. I was ready. Even though my granddaughter hadn't been born yet, my daughter hadn't been married yet, I was sure that I was ready to go. And that made me really not fear the whole notion of what it might be like when I do die, because I was almost there, and it was okay. About a year later, my father, who was 85 at the time, and he was an old 85, He had had a lot of health problems. He had had a lot of arthritis and probably should have had both hips replaced, but really wasn't well enough to go through the surgery at the time. And he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Well, he was a Marine pilot. They smoked and drank coffee. You know, he talks about all the different times they were being deployed. He talks about the Cuban Missile Crisis while they were waiting. Are they going to fly? Are they going to bomb? What's going to happen? And I said, well, what did you do all that time? He said, we played pool, we listened to Marty Robbins sing El Paso, and we smoked cigarettes and drank coffee. So he probably smoked 3 packs a day for more than 30 years. Not a surprise that he would develop lung cancer. He was ill for about a year, and we had some very frank talks because he was devoutly Catholic. He foundationally believed in what was to come after death, had no fear of death, but wasn't necessarily excited about the prospect. But he said, you know, philosophically, we have to understand that our bodies are built for planned obsolescence. At some point, the machine will just stop. But if we have faith, we know that what fuels the machine will go on. So he helped me not be afraid of his death. So he was very, very sick and had chemo, had radiation. Nothing really worked. The tumors were not operable. So we knew that it was just a matter of time before he became very, very ill. And that time came, and he was still at home. And what happened was my daughter, my beautiful, wonderful daughter, graduated from nursing school and had been engaged to be married to the man that I introduced her to in the parking lot of the Ratty Bar. Her wedding was coming up. And so the day of her wedding, one of my sisters, because I have more than the law should allow, was supposed to pick up my parents and bring them to the wedding, because I was engaged with other things with my daughter. She got to my parents' house. My mother's all dressed, and my father can't stand up. He can't get out of his chair. And so they didn't come to the wedding. And of course, I don't have my cell phone on me. I'm mother of the bride. I couldn't figure out where are my parents? How can we start the wedding? Well, the wedding went on, and it was beautiful, but I kept looking for my parents. And after the ceremony, my sister let me know Papa just couldn't get out of his chair. So the next morning, I'm up at my parents' house, and I said, Papa, you have to go to the hospital. He said, no, I'm fine right here. I said, you can't get out of your chair. We can't lift you on our own. We have to take you to the hospital. And I knew then that he probably would never come home from the hospital. My mother was not of the countenance and personality that could manage a hospice death at home. And so I didn't even introduce that into the conversation. Luckily, we had beautiful care at St. Joseph's in Orange in their oncology department, and they effectively did hospice in the hospital, although nobody really talked about the fact that he probably wouldn't go home until 4 or 5 days into his week stay. So my daughter gets married on a Friday night, leaves for her honeymoon. I'm there at the hospital all day, most of the night. My sisters and I take shifts. My mother is there. We're there. And my father is getting sicker and sicker. And his air hunger is getting worse. And with lung cancer, there's a breathing issue. And so they had maxed out what they could give him in oxygen. And they had even taped the oxygen mask to his face so that none would escape and he'd get everything he could. And he was in pain. So they gradually increased his pain medicine to ensure that he would be comfortable. And at one point, he entered the hospital on a Saturday morning. So the following Friday night, they said, if we up his medicine, he might not wake up again and talk to you again. He'll be very comfortable, but he might not wake up again. And effectively what they were talking about is palliative sedation, which is enough medication to really calm somebody down, take care of any pain medicine, make them feel very peaceful, but they're not going to come back and have a conversation with you. And we said, fine, let's make him comfortable. Let's not make him be struggling for air. So we started effectively an 11th hour vigil. Pardon me. And on Monday, I went to work for a couple of hours in the morning, and I said to my boss, I'm leaving in about 20 minutes. And she said, oh, did you get a call? I said, no, but it will be today. So I got to the hospital 11 o'clock-ish, sat with my mother, sent my mother and sister to go and get my mother lunch and give her some diversion, because this is her partner of 60 years. It's not easy to, number one, watch him be ill and suffer, but number two, to contemplate life without him. So the hours went on, and about 3 o'clock, I could tell that his breathing and just the whole demeanor of his body was changing. And not only was his breathing more irregular, the color of his skin was changing. And my father was an old 85. He'd played a lot of golf. He'd experienced a lot of radiation from the sun in jet aircraft that didn't have the same kind of tinting on the windows that we have today. So he had terrible wrinkles. His little white Irish skin was kind of baked by years in the sun from the golf course and the airplanes. Multiple skin cancers. He was adorable to us, but not really good looking anymore. And he had been a very good-looking man. Strong features and clear-eyed and straight-shouldered. The quintessential Marine Top Gun fighter, although he was a jet fighter before the Top Gun school. But that kind of strength and assurance and square jaw, right out of central casting all of his life. And now he was a little old man and sick and wrinkled and dehydrated and not looking well at all, a little jaundiced, so yellowish and, just not attractive. This was not going to be a Hollywood death scene. So my sister and my mom came back and sat down, and they're talking about TJ Maxx, and they're talking about going shopping, and should I exchange those red shoes? And they're talking like magpies, because that was a coping mechanism. And I was sitting next to my father at the head of the bed, and I said to my mom, "Come sit with me." And she said, "Why? Why? What's going on?" I said, "Come and sit with me." Because I knew that he was taking his last breaths. And sure enough, within about 5 minutes, he stopped breathing. Gently, there was almost no sound in the room, but the air changed. And I got up and went outside and called one of the nurses so that she could come in and check to be sure. And she said, "Yes, he's gone." And she took off his mask. And our tradition, and in many Catholic families, is immediately upon death, you start saying the rosary and you say certain prayers for the dead. So my sister, who's sort of a recalcitrant remonstrant Catholic, stood up, and the three of us held hands and started praying the rosary. And as we did so, the air in the room changed further, and the light in the room changed. And I could feel movement. And I looked up at the ceiling, and it was open and light. And I didn't see anything but light. And my mother said, "Look at his face and his hands." He had been stuck 20 times for IVs. His hands were old and mottled and terrible skin cancers, sunspots. And his hands were the hands of a young man. And his skin was completely clear and soft and not gnarled. And his face was the same face of when he graduated from flight school. He was completely a young man again. And the air in the room continued to rise, and we all saw the light. And it was remarkable and sacred and reassuring, somewhat terrifying, awesome in the truest sense of the word, because I truly felt that we were in the presence of God. And that this transitional moment was something to be feared, but in a very good and solid and foundationally reassuring way. And after a few minutes, things subsided, but my father's face continued to be that of a young man. My sister and my mother left, and my mother did not want my father to be alone until the mortuary people came to get him. He had willed his body to UCI Medical School, so that's who was coming to transfer him into their care. So I said I would stay. And after a little while, the young man showed up to transfer my father, and a security guard, if you can believe this from the hospital, they're assigned to accompany the body. And they were unaccustomed to having a family member go along with them. I said, no, I promised my mother I would go with my father, and I would make sure that he got into the vehicle, and I will do that. So they don't take deceased individuals out through the regular patient visitor elevator. Somehow that's bad public relations. So we went to the service industrial elevator, and we get into the elevator, and the elevator stops mid-floor. So here are these two young men. They're both about 20 or 22 years old. I'm there, a grieving daughter, and I was holding it together pretty well, and my father's deceased body. And we're stuck in the elevator. And we're there for more than an hour. And so they're doing what they're doing the technicians are doing what they can to fix the elevator. But we're in this elevator with my father, and he's not in a body bag yet. And I pulled back the sheet to show them his face, and I spent an hour telling them the story of who is this man that now we're walking with. And I told them the story. I said, he has won almost every military honor there is. He's flown jet aircraft. He's bombed villages. He's argued before the United States Supreme Court. He's raised 5 children and none of us are in jail. And they too said, wow, he looks so young. And my father's face looked content, where it had been racked and struggling and crying out with air hunger just an hour before. He was calm and beautiful again and clear-skinned, and the essence of his faith, of his life, had transcended, and we were there to watch it. And some of that divine that was in the room, I believe, stayed with me. And with every death that I'm privileged to witness, I believe that there is an opening to the divine, that if we are there and are willing and not afraid of it, some of it will touch us and stay with us. And I hope you all have the opportunity to have some kind of similar experience. And I will close with an Irish blessing, particularly appropriate today. For those of you in Christian tradition, today is January 6th. It's the Feast of the Epiphany, which is Little Christmas. This is when the wise men supposedly found the infant and brought the gifts. And in Ireland, in Irish tradition, this is when the women get to really celebrate and let men do the work. So it's called Little Christmas, or Nalag, Maban. My Gaelic is weak. May the blessed light be upon you, light without and light within. May blessed light shine on you and warm your hearts until they glow like great fire, so that strangers may come and be warmed, and also your friends. Thank you, my friends.